By now, you've waited all this time to get to what you probably think is the most important component to your desktop or your laptop purchase, and that is going to be the processor. So, what we'll do is just like we've been doing, we'll look at this in three phases: Windows, Chromebook, and Mac OS. The processor is absolutely going to have an impact on how the system overall is going to feel. The good news is that modern processors are all really very, very good. And the good news is that if you are looking to make a purchase from a machine that has been manufactured in, let's say, the last 2 to 3 years, you are probably going to get a machine that is going to feel fast for a long time and is going to be worth your investment. And I know what you're thinking. I wish you said that in the beginning so that I didn't have to listen to all of these other considerations. But believe me, they all turn out to make a sane and sensible purchase, even better. So on the Windows side, really there are two kinds of processor companies we should be talking about, and that is going to be Intel and AMD. If you are looking at a Windows PC with a Snapdragon processor that is the same Snapdragon that is probably in your Android phone, stop looking at those. We have had nothing but complaints from students about compatibility, about speed, about battery. Actually, battery they never complain about. But everything else we get complaints about. So stick to, my suggestion is Intel and AMD. While you're sticking to Intel and AMD, stick to, as far as the Intel processor goes, the 10th, 11th, and 12th generation of processors. We'll get more into it in just a moment. For the AMD, stick to 3, 4, and 5 for the series of processors there. Anything older than that actually does represent a significant step down in processing power, in battery consumption. And by now, an 8th gen Intel chip has been sitting someplace on a shelf for 3+ years. That really does have an impact on battery longevity, stuff like that, the warranty, and they're getting to be past where you should be investing in them because they're not going to have as long a useful life. We suggest the 11th generation chip is probably the sweet spot. It's still really very new, and it will be supported, and they're still really very fast. The 12th generation is the absolute newest here in the spring of 22, and you're going to pay more for that. So let's talk really quickly about the three levels of processor that you can expect from the Intel series. i3 is the bottom, and those are usually the slowest, and they are also occasionally just two cores for the processor, which means it can only execute two instructions at a time in those cores. That's going to be fine for really, really low powered stuff. So if you're never going to do anything more than couch surfing, a couple of tabs in Edge, and a document open, those will be acceptable. They won't be barn burningly fast, but they'll be acceptable. We suggest actually the i5, the middle version, is the most reasonable to get. They almost always run 4 cores. That's going to be important because that means that there are 4 simultaneous instructions that can be executed at a time. That little bit of investment makes it essentially twice as fast. Really, don't like kill yourself trying to find the fastest of the Core i5 versions. It's almost immaterial which one you get. They all run really very, very closely together. i7 is, the not the top of the line. There is actually an i9, and that is reserved for the beefiest of laptops or the beefiest of desktops. And the numbers show you're not getting a ton of utility out of those i9s. The numbers show there's not a ton of difference between an i5 and an i7 for the average consumer. Again, if you know you're going to do a lot of video or audio editing, you know you're going to use really big, beefy programs, maybe it's worth it for you to get the i7. But as a blanket statement we feel we can make here at Rock Valley, the i5 is the perfect one to go for. On the AMD side of things, they do, instead of i3, i5, and i7, they have different generations there. Those different generations that you should be investigating are 3, 4, and 5. So it'll say a third generation, and then it'll say Ryzen. So that's the same as an I series. And for the Ryzen, they have 3, 5, and 7 series. So it'll say generation 3, generation 4, or generation 5. And those are the acceptable ones to get. If you see a second generation or a generation 2 AMD Ryzen processor, so Ryzen would be like the I series of processors from Intel, we generally suggest you stay away from those. Those are actually slower than the 8th generation Intel i3 and 5 series stuff. So on the AMD side, the processor is known as the Ryzen chip, RYZEN. Really, we suggest 3, 5, and 7. The Ryzen 3 is almost exactly analogous to the i3 processor on Intel. The Ryzen 5 series, so it would say 5300 or something to that effect, would be analogous to the Intel i5. We actually do suggest that if you're going to get something with an AMD processor, that you do get the 5000 series, because that's going to be the middle of the road and the best value. The 7 series, faster. The 9 series, those are for desktops almost exclusively, or very, very highly potent laptops that you very, very probably have no interest in spending your money on. I know I sure wouldn't. The interesting thing on the Ryzen, the AMD side of things, is you can actually get a 6-core processor for the same amount of money that you could get a 4-core processor on the Intel side. And that Ryzen chip is actually going to be faster and have better battery life, but if you do certain video intensive things, it's going to perform worse. So I was really hoping to be able to get away with keeping, I had a 6-core Ryzen 5. It was a Lenovo laptop. They still sell them at Costco. Costco's actually a fantastic place to get them because there's extra warranty on them. And for the daily stuff, that 6-core AMD Ryzen 5 mopped the floor with the exact same Intel version of that laptop. Absolutely mopped the floor with it. The one problem was video encoding, because on the video side of things, on the Windows side of things, you are, for the most part, you are going to use Adobe software. And the problem was Premiere Pro with that Ryzen chip was a dog, and it was super slow. And all of that benefit I was getting from 2 extra cores for the processor completely and totally went away when I would have to export a video just like this one. It would take much longer, like twice as long. And video exports already take a very, very long time. So away that laptop went, because my needs were video exporting above all else. I didn't really have to care about battery power and things like that. So I went with the i5, and honestly, because most of what I do on that is going to be video work like that, it was totally worth it. So on a Windows PC, you'd be looking at an Intel i3, i5, or i7, and quite frankly, the i5 is the sweet spot. It's right there in the middle. It has the correct number of cores. It has the correct speed for you to get a great experience. On the AMD side of things, there are the 3000 series, the 5000 series, the 7000 series. Stick with the middle. The AMD Ryzen 5 series is going to be fantastic, and probably you'll get extra cores. And as long as you don't need something very, very specific like I did with video, you're really very, very well served by those AMD chips, whereas, much into the past you might not have been. We'll talk really quickly here about Chromebooks. Chromebooks run on low power processors. Chromebooks oftentimes run on Snapdragon type processors, so very, very slow ones. Frankly, it is not as big an impact, the processor isn't, as the RAM is. So as long as you're finding something with an Intel M series processor, it's probably going to feel pretty snappy as long as there's 8 or so gig of RAM in there. There's just so many manufacturers with so many different weird mobile processors that it's really hard for us to make a blanket statement for you to be able to go make a purchasing decision. So on a Chromebook, the bigger decision is on the RAM, and the more RAM probably will come with a better processor, and that's the safest route to go there. Now, on the Mac side of things, unless you know you are going to need to run a virtual machine, and if you're thinking to yourself, what's a virtual machine? Don't even bother thinking about it any further. Just buy an M1 Mac. It's all the more power you are going to need for all of your daily tasks for a good long while. I know I've said this story before in class, but I'll mention it again here. I'm recording presently because I couldn't get my webcam to work with the colors properly on my iMac. So I'm recording from my iMac, and this is from 2017. It has 64 gig of RAM. It has an 8 gigabyte dedicated graphics card. It is running off an M.2 external SSD, and it is fast as hell for most things. And my $500 Mac Mini can run absolute circles around it when it comes to video exporting. So what I end up doing is I record here, I just move them over to my Mac Mini, and I do the editing from there because it's 1,000 times faster. I spent $2,800 on this system. All told, I spent $500 on my Mac Mini with that same M1 chipset in there. 8 gig of RAM versus 64. It's not even close. If you're going to buy a Mac, the one we recommend for all students is the MacBook Air. It's going to be fast. It's going to last a long time on a charge. It's going to have a great screen. Look no farther. And I understand that there's like these processor arms races. I get involved in those myself. And I'll tell you, you are going to spend way more money on an M1 Pro or an M1 Max in a new version of the MacBook Pro. And very probably you will never get any added utility out of that extra couple of $1,000. If you're going to buy a Mac OS machine, there's really only two we can suggest you buy. One of them, the desktop, is a Mac Mini. The other one, the laptop, is the MacBook Air. That's all the more you need to know for that. So processors, certainly they're important. They're not as important as RAM for most of the tasks that you're going to undertake. Stick to the middle of the road. An i5 10th or 11th generation on a Windows PC, an AMD Ryzen 5 or 7, but probably the 5 for the 4th or 5th generation of the Ryzen on the AMD side. Chromebook, more RAM. MacBook, just stick to the Air.